Hello, welcome to another Amati Insights call. Before we start today, as usual, please do take the time to review the disclaimer on the screen, which is also available on our website. The point obviously is to highlight that what we're discussing today does not constitute investment advice. So everyone's circumstances are different. It's essential that you do your own research or consult a professional for advice that's tailored to you. But with that, today we are discussing what might seem like an obscure subject at first, but is rapidly growing into being a really huge market, and that is Alzheimer's diagnostics. So back in June on an Insights call, we discussed the rapid proliferation of diagnostics generally across the healthcare space, and we noted that as a society, we're discovering more and more biomarkers, either genetic or protein-based, which can be used for the early detection of disease. And this is happening because of advances in genetics, areas like high throughput screening technologies, which are becoming exponentially cheaper and faster, proteomics, multiomics techniques, mass spectrometry, etc., PCR testing. So there's a lot of things that are happening that are changing and improving every year. So there are more ways to detect things, which means there are more things to detect. And ultimately, as you know, if you can get better answers, you tend to ask more questions. Another factor in this whole process is consumer acceptance. So you've probably all seen, ads on the London Underground telling you to go and get a health MOT, and I think it's getting into the psyche of society now. More awareness of testing, clinical testing, even COVID played a role, I think, in familiarizing that for consumers. I'm just standing back, sort of at the system level. The obvious thing is that earlier and more accurate detection tends to mean earlier and more helpful intervention. So before the condition becomes acute, and that's obviously better for the patient, but it also saves the healthcare system a huge amount of money.
Yeah, it just occurred to me, we probably should have mentioned that not only does not constitute investment advice, it also doesn't constitute healthcare advice. So, please do not rely on us for diagnostics of your health conditions, and seek professional advice on that when necessary as well. But I guess as investors, we're really interested in is if the circumstances align just right, you get this ultimate flywheel effect. You get earlier detection, which enables earlier, more effective treatment that gets better outcomes for patients' health systems, as Graeme just described, and that's expanding patient population, and it's expanding the total available market. So it's sort of doing well by doing good in a way in the healthcare space, and that's what we're looking for in diagnostics in many places, including in Alzheimer's, which obviously is a very important problem to solve.
Yes, yeah, it certainly is it's a subset of that broader dynamic we're talking about, but it is a huge health problem. And potentially it's a very large beneficiary of this process. I mean, dementia generally affects a very large portion of the population. There was a recent Nature study that suggested that I think 42% of people over 55 would develop some form of dementia by the age of 95, which is huge. And Alzheimer's itself accounts for about 2/3 of all dementia cases. So, it's a very significant problem. I think even at the moment, people estimate that around 7 million people in the US are currently living with Alzheimer's, although about 3/4 of those cases are probably undiagnosed as yet. And in lower income countries, that problem can rise to 90% of cases being undiagnosed. So it's a huge issue, and it's a burden, obviously, in terms of cost on society. In the US alone, they spend about $350 billion a year on dementia, and that is expected to rise to about $1 trillion by 2050. And it's an expensive problem to treat. At the end, just the last 5 years of life for an Alzheimer's patient costs about $300,000, which is more than the cost of treating a cancer or heart disease patient. So these are big unsolved problems.
And we're still learning about the condition. I mean, the science knows a lot, but keeps discovering more. The main principle, though, I think is pretty clear. It's the phenomenon where certain types of proteins accumulate in your brain, in the patient's brain, and you feel like suffocate, strangle the neurons, the neural connections that form our memories, form our cognitive function, form our even motor skills. And there are two categories of proteins which are the main offenders. The beta amyloids, which are the main biomarker people look for, and something called tau proteins. technicalities are maybe irrelevant. It's a particular type of proteins that, if you like, gum up the system, and that informs both diagnostics and treatment. In diagnostics, we're looking for those proteins, detecting them to identify the disease and severity of the disease. And the drugs that the industry is developing are looking to clear this accumulation of harmful proteins from the brain, from the system.
Yeah, but obviously today, the whole approach to diagnosis is still quite limited. So mostly it's behavioural. So essentially waiting till the symptoms are obvious, which then needs to be confirmed with some kind of typically very invasive biological test. So the most reliable test to kind of back up those behavioural symptoms has been a thing called CSF, which is cerebral spinal fluid test, or a spinal tap, which is very unpleasant and particularly disruptive for older patients. So many patients just refuse that diagnosis completely and just go with the behavioural diagnostics. Things have improved a bit in the last 10 years. We've also had PET scanning, which has been transformative, but it's very expensive. We discussed this actually again on an earlier Insights call on radiopharmaceuticals. But here the problem is cost and somewhat limited throughput.
Yeah, and I guess that's where the revolution in diagnostics that we're talking about is taking place, and this is sort of hot off the press. It's only been happening in the last couple of years, and it's only been getting approval and adoption in literally a couple of months, and that's something called blood-based biomarkers. So it's looking for the same proteins and kind of judging from their ratios and concentrations what's really going on. But the analyte, what you're looking for, is blood. So it's just a irregular blood draw. The easiest, most established way of testing, and that's seeing fantastic progress. We had two, as of a couple of days ago, actually, we now have 2 FDA approvals for the tests. One, the early mover, is a test called Lumipulse from a Japanese company, Fujirebio, but it's a division of another Japanese company called HU Group, so it's a bit complicated. But the underlying IP actually came out of Belgian company InnoGenetics, which Fujirebio acquired quite a few years ago, and those guys were the pioneers of Alzheimer's diagnostics generally. They are really been working on this for a couple of decades. And then the other one is the Alexis Alzheimer's test from Roche, which is a diagnostics giant. And that test is very useful. It's testing something else, but it's a rule out only. So it tells you if a patient presents with a dementia that it's not Alzheimer's. So Fujirebio at the moment is the best blood biomarker test available. More are available, but we're seeing really fast adoption. So FDA approval, of course, is a big endorsement, but equally important is 2 largest lab networks in the US, LabCorp and Quest, had adopted that Fujirebio Lumipulse test and are carrying it today. So you can commission it today as a doctor or as a patient. And the other breakthrough came this summer, where an organization called AAIC, which is the main neurology and Alzheimer's body of America, recommended this test as a definitive diagnostics test. Now, it can still be combined with PET, with this imaging test, but effectively this association said, look, if you get a test of this precision, they didn't mention Lumipulse by name, but it's the only one that matches at the moment. If you get a test of this precision, that's the only thing you need. And it's not just a one-time thing. The really exciting stuff from diagnostics industry perspective is that you can now see the future where you screen, and then you confirm, and then when you start treating, you test multiple times to see how the treatment is progressing, how well this plaques, this proteins are clearing from the patient's brain. Now the next important question is, okay, now that you've diagnosed this, can you actually treat it? And on this front, we have two drugs on the market today, Kisunla and Leqembi from Lilly and Eisai Biogen respectively. And they are the major new treatments, both biologics, interestingly enough. A lot of new drugs, as we've discussed in this calls before, are biologics. Both biologics, they're approved, they're growing. It's still getting a bit of a mixed clinical reception. Why? Well, they're infusion drugs, so you have to go to the hospital. It's a bit disruptive. They are approved for use later in the game, when the patient is symptomatic, when you're quite far along the development of the disease. And their efficacy is limited. It's helpful, but it's limited. And they're slowing, not curing the disease, and they come with side effects. But that's the best we can do. But the interesting thing is that some data from this, from the clinical trials that led to the approval of these drugs, suggests if you apply them earlier, they are more effective. And so this becomes really interesting. What if you can diagnose the patients before they're symptomatic and say, okay, you're doing fine, but you've got these plaques, and we can clear those proteins from your brain, improve your, eliminate the cognitive problems down the line. And actually, the side effect profile of this early application might be better. And Eli Lilly has a clinical trial underway called Trailblazer 3, which is doing exactly that. It's looking to prevent Alzheimer's rather than treat it when it's quite advanced. And the companies are also working on easier to administer medications. Leqembi, for example, which is currently infused in the hospital, has just approved a subcutaneous, basically injection formulation. It's called Leqembi iClick, and the clue is in the name. It's easy, a once weekly pen injector, similar to what people do for diabetes, for example. And there are more drugs in the work. There are about 140 Alzheimer's drugs. So the real, this was a very hard problem to solve, a bit of a graveyard of drug development before, but there's a real upsurge of enthusiasm, new methods to get this active ingredients in your brain, like Roche's aptly named brain shuttle technology. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, the clinical trials always come with the risk, but the industry is more hopeful, a lot more hopeful than it was before.
Yeah, it does. It does certainly feel like we're closer to launching that flywheel you talked about earlier. Industry certainly is talking about screening, and that's similar to what's happening in some places already for things like bowel and prostate cancer. And it's important, obviously, for the companies that are approaching this, the addressable market is already quite significant, single billions at the moment, but probably up to 10 billion in the foreseeable future. And then globally, an addressable market of probably up to 50 billion if you do assume we go down the road of screening, I guess.
Yeah. So what do you do as an investor in the space? Well, the one company we mentioned, HU Group, which is a Japanese diagnostics company, which developed through their division Fujifilm, developed the Lumipulse test, the first and the only, for now, approved definitive diagnostics test for Alzheimer's. They are a listed company. They're listed in Japan. This business is growing really rapidly for them. It's multiplying per year. It's still a part of a small part of their business, but rapidly becoming a very important part of their business. So they have a clear early mover advantage. So that's one place where we see opportunity. We bought the stock for our global innovation portfolio recently. The ecosystem of diagnostics generally is quite a consolidated oligopoly. Roche, which developed this Alexis Alzheimer's rule-out test, is a listed company. It's a smaller part of their business because they're a giant, but nonetheless. Danaher, which is actually another portfolio holding of ours, is working on a test, and we wish them well. But it'll be addition to their diagnostics menu, not a huge needle mover for the company. And then finally, as for people who know how we invest, you would know that we were looking for pioneers like HU Group, Fujifilm. But we're also looking for adopters. Who has the patient base, the real estate, the networks, where by adding that test, you make that business a bit more valuable and grow a bit faster. And here, the lab networks are the obvious place to go. So a near duopoly in the US of LabCorp and Quest, the largest networks of labs. This will be a really important additional test for their range of options, and they are carrying it today. They're seeing this rapid growth today. So we own LabCorp, not specifically for Alzheimer's, but more for a broader diagnostics growth. All these innovations ultimately accrue to the place where you can perform these tests and deliver those results to hospitals, and LabCorp is one of those adopters, which we think will benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, unfortunately, we're running just over time, but hopefully that was helpful. We covered a lot of ground there, but otherwise we will see you all in a couple of weeks.
Thanks very much for your interest. Stay healthy.